I became Frum not because of intellectual reasons. I became Frum because I saw in the religious world, I saw kindness. I saw Rachamim, I saw Avas Yisrael. And I said to myself, I want to be a person like that. I want to have a life like that. It's still very true that the fertility regimen is very emotionally draining. I mean, you're dealing with hormones, you're dealing with timing, you get your hopes up, and then for whatever reason, the Ribbon Shalom has not decided. And it can really wreak havoc on a marriage unless the husband and wife are very, very strong and connected to each other. This can be a source of tremendous heartbreak. And can even break up. A marriage can even break up over this particular issue. The scary one is that Gog and Magog is only supposed to take 12 minutes. And for 250 years, no one understood what type of war would be over in 12 minutes. Now, unfortunately, we know exactly what type of war could be over in 12 minutes.
I've done over 200 interviews, and I love to ask my guests who they want to hear. The number one request by Rabbanim and leaders is Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz. He's one of the greatest minds of our generation, and you're going to be pretty surprised by some of the things he says. He graduated from Harvard Law School and gave up his prestigious position in law to guide the world as a rabbi. We discuss in this episode the really difficult topics to deal with in the Orthodox Jewish world, like adoption, the yeshivas and IDF, marriage, the battle of Gog and Magog, and a lot more. This episode is powered by our good friends at Torah Anytime, the leader of Torah teaching online, and a lot more than you realize. BitBean, the premier software team for business owners. Twillory.com, the clothing brand taking the world right now by storm. And of course, Israel Select's mission to arm thousands of soldiers with Tefillin. This episode is in memory of Shimon David ben Yaakov Shlema and Miriam Sarah Bas Yaakov Moshe. This episode is also in memory of Mordechai ben David Yehuda. Anyone who knows Morty Stiepel knows that Morty was someone who was larger than life. He was taken way too soon from us, but he was someone who came from a house of chesed, and he was incredible, that incredible smile. And this episode should give his neshama a tremendous aliyah. We're thinking of him. We're thinking of him always. Also, stick around for the end for Living L'Chaim's big announcement. We've been working on something for months, and this project is very powerful. And one more thing right before we start. There is a bit of a trigger warning. I discuss very sensitive topics with Rabbi Breitowitz. It's topics that may not be for all ages and stages, but it's definitely conversations that are important to have. He is a gadol, and I think you're gonna see the godless by his responses. Okay, here we go. I'm Yaakov Langer, and you're listening to Inspiration for the Nation. First off, big thank you to AIR Somayach and to Zevi Kaufman for making this all happen. We're doing it in here, and people who are watching now, they'll be able to see the beautiful base medrash and how amazing it is. And I will get to the question, Rabbi Breitowitz, of what brought you to AIR Somayach. But before then, could you tell us, I guess, a little about your childhood? What was your childhood like? I
went to an Orthodox day school, but Baruch Hashem, my parents sent me an Orthodox day school from the time I was in kindergarten. But, most of the students I went to school with were not Shomer Shabbos, because there wasn't a Salman Schechter, there wasn't a conservative alternative in those days. And it was co-ed, so I'm mentioning all my Averas here. So it was a co-ed school, we're not Shomer Shabbos. And, maybe I wouldn't want my children or grandchildren to go to that type of school. It wasn't Frum enough. But there was some real strength. We learned how to get along. We learned, I think, Avas Yisrael. We learned how to work with people. And those are tremendous lessons. And so I'm very grateful for the way I grew up. And then AIRSUIT guys used to learn with us little kids in the summer. And we also took an annual trip to AIRSUIT from the time I was 6th grade. So Baltimore was the place I wanted to go.
It was the cool place.
Yeah. And I went to AIRSUIT, and I was there for a number of years. I got smicha in AIRSUIT. Then I went to law school afterwards. That's already, I'm obviously describing a whole bunch of years pretty quickly.
Was it a hard? I mean, and to clarify, you went to Harvard.
I went to Harvard Law School. Yeah,
Was the yeshiva for lack of better terms, bugging out that you're leaving yeshiva and going to Harvard?
It was a very, very difficult issue. In fact, I have a little bit of an interesting story. My great Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Breitowitz, one of the Gedolei Ador, he insisted, they were not that happy about my going to law school. They thought I should stay in full-time yeshiva, eventually go to Kollel. And, I can't say they were wrong. Even now, I wonder, if I made the right decision. But they told me I have to talk to Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, who happened to be Rav Breitowitz's cousin. Rav Yaakov is a Baal Eitzah. He understands people. He understands where you're coming from, and he has Das Torah. So I was right 21 or 22. And I had never met Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky before, but I took a trip all up to Muncie. And I remember I prepared shticklich of Torah. I thought, I'd have to have something to say. And I come to Muncie, and there's this kind old man who's sitting in shirt sleeves who, offered to make me lunch. It's Rav Yaakov. He offered to give me a place to sleep. And he didn't ask me to say any Torah at all. And he gave me, I couldn't believe it. Today our Gedolim are so busy, you get 5 minutes, 10 minutes. He gave me 3 hours of his time.
Wow.
3 hours of his time. And it was as if he had nothing else to do. I was like the only person in the world. Amazing. And people, I remember, would pop in to tell him a vort, tell him a joke, and he would say hello. He would interact with all sorts of people. But he focused on me. And we spoke for a lot of hours. Now, the one thing I remember about Rav Yaakov was so amazing. He didn't give me any answers. He kept on asking me questions. He wanted me to understand what the issues were. And he wanted to be sure I heard all of the studim. So he would say, did you think of this? Did you think of this? And he wanted to draw the emes out for me. And at the end, he told me that I'm not going to tell you what to do. But whatever you do, you have to use it in your Avodas Hashem. So you go to law school, you got to figure out a way. You don't go to law school. And actually, some of my Rebbeim in AIRSUIT didn't believe that he said that. But I maybe I misunderstood, but this is what I understood from him. And to me, it was such a model, not only of Midas and not only of Derech Eretz and Kavod to a little kid, but the wisdom of, the Rebbe doesn't micromanage you and tell you what you got to do. He wants you to come to the emes. That's what a parent should do with a child. That's what a Rebbe does with a Talmud. So as far as I saw, he at least gave me reshus to go. But it was a difficult issue. It's an issue I still, to this very day, I grapple with it. Because you always wonder about what Robert Frost, called the road not taken. You never know. What would life have been? In fact, even on the Ner Yisrael level, my parents didn't want me to go to Ner Yisrael because a lot of the Ner Yisrael guys didn't go to college in those days. Oh. They wanted me to go to YU. And I really didn't want to. My heart was set on Ner Yisrael. And I didn't realize there were people working on my behalf. The day that I was machled, okay, I'm going to go to YU and not fight it, I get news that my parents relented to Ner Yisrael. But I promised them I would go to college. All right, so the question is, am I mechuyev to keep the promise? But that was the basis of my going to college. And but they then told me later, going to law school was lifnim mishur esadin. They didn't even expect me.
Oh, what a waste. Why did you go to Harvard?
I was yaitze my haftachas. But so that issue of, you always wonder about the road not taken, because the truth of the matter is YU itself has a lot of milas to this day. See, when I was in Eretz Yisrael, this goes a long time ago, we were often mezalzel in YU. That's what yeshivas did. They looked at YU, they called Rav Soloveitchik really a gadol. They called him JB. This goes back a real long time ago. But, I see now that a lot of that was immature. And there was real kaiches there. So I sometimes wonder, what would life have been if I'd go to YU? Even. So there's a lot of things I wonder about. But, you have to understand that the intersection between Bechira and Hashgacha is a very complicated one. The idea between your choices and what God determines for you. But, if for whatever reason you find yourself on a certain path, then you can't spend your whole life thinking about, oh, what would have been there. I got to think about, okay, I'm here. So how do I make the best of it?
The problem also would be there would be a trillion different realities because every decision is like, oh, should I take a drink now? Should I take a drink later? Okay, then it splits. And then
that's right. And then you get paralyzed. I mean, you see this all the time. People don't get married because, oh, how do I know? Maybe the next one will be better. They can't learn this masechta because maybe that masechta, whatever it is. So lemaisa, you got to make choices, and when you make choices, you're closing doors. That's very, very true. But at least there's a potential for something meaningful. So I can't help but second guess a lot, but I try to keep it to a relative minimum.
Really beautiful. I'm very curious. As you were growing up, and obviously you're born into an Orthodox home, did you look, and maybe not try, but did you look to see like, oh, maybe Reform Judaism's correct, maybe Christianity, maybe Islam? Like, there's so many.
It's a funny. I do have to maybe tell you something which is a little bit personal. Sure. My parents were not Frum when I was young. Baruch Hashem, they became well. Number one, they came from Frum homes. In the course of the war and various other things, they left things for a while. So that's why it's an especial credit to them that when they were not Shomer Shabbos, they sent me to yeshiva. And it's not just yeshiva. I mean, day schools cost money. They didn't have money at the time. I mean, they went through a great, great mesiras nefesh to give me a chinuch. And a lot of their friends, didn't. They had a whole chevra of people who were Holocaust survivors who maybe they sent their kids to yeshiva for kindergarten or something. But, after that, first grade, they already didn't want to do it. So what made me Frum? What made me Frum, right? If my parents were not Frum in the early years of my life, what made me Frum, see, it's interesting, was, I kind of got adopted in some ways by people of the community. They would have me over for Shabbos. I became Frum not because of intellectual reasons. I became Frum because I saw in the religious world, I saw kindness. I saw rachamim. I saw avas Yisrael. And I said to myself, I want to be a person like that. I want to have a life like that. Now, it's a funny thing. It affects me to this very day because sometimes people want to know, how do you know the Torah is from God? And how do you know? And they want to intellectual arguments, philosophical arguments, which, I guess is part of my job. So I got to get into it. Although a lot of times I refer them to Rabbi Gottlieb or someone who's more proficient philosophically. But if people ask me why I became Frum, it wasn't because of any of that at all. It's because of the midos that I saw in a religious community. I wanted to be part of it. So in that sense, I really didn't fool around with conservative reform because I wasn't dealing with intellectual challenges. I was dealing with a place that I felt comfortable, that welcomed me, that took care of me. When the Ner Yisrael guys would come in the summer, they would learn with me. I remember learning Cheskes Abato. I'm thinking now I probably understood like 25% of what they were doing. But they would spend, and then he would give me a ride on the back of his bicycle or the front of his bicycle. And these things I remember. And I said, well, Yiddishkeit is good. Yiddishkeit is nice. I want to be part of it. So maybe my journey is a little different than some of the people who become Frum when they're older. But the truth is, even when you're older, I think a lot of what makes people religious is the sense of warmth that they get. Yeah, I mean, Yiddishkeit is a rational religion. I mean, obviously, Talmud Torah is the greatest mitzvah. And we believe that you got to use your mind and you got to understand. But I think that comes achar hamaisa. I don't think a person gets Frum because they've examined all the proofs of God. A person becomes Frum because they see this is good. And then, achar hamaisa, they go and they determine the logical structures of things. I think the logic follows the emotion rather than vice versa.
I hear that. I want to get on to like some very interesting.
And I just want to say, Baruch Hashem, in the course of time, my parents became very, 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 very Frum, very religious.
Beautiful.
So they left the world as totally shomer mitzvahs.
Wow. We'll be right back to this week's episode. And the next part with Rabbi Breitowitz will blow your mind. But I just have to tell you why I absolutely love Torah Anytime. Did you know that Torah Anytime has over 12 million hours of Torah learning a year, 1 million users, and 200,000 lectures and classes? It's really mind-blowing to be a part of something so big and meaningful. You probably know Torah Anytime as the go-to place for amazing Jewish learning. But guess what? There's so much more. Are you ready? because here we go. Strap in. Got a minute? Daily Dose delivers quick, inspiring videos to start your day. It's one of the daily rituals. Need a boost? Call the hotline for uplifting messages on the go. Rebbe Anytime connects you with Rabbeim for guidance designed to help yeshiva students. Jewish Anytime has content for all ages and interests. Chesed Anytime connects you to impactful chesed opportunities. Give back in meaningful ways. One of my personal favorites, Story Anytime, captivates kids with inspiring tales. My son loves it. The mobile app, the newsletter, publications, and convention recordings keep you informed and inspired. So when I think of Torah Anytime, I remember it's your one-stop destination for Torah-centered growth and inspiration. Okay, thanks for letting me share my love for Torah Anytime. Stay inspired and connected at TorahAnytime.com. Literally anytime. Check out their app. It's great. You'll love it. There's something for everyone. Now, before we dive back in, something crazy happened in the past few months. Where has the most achdus and unity been for the Jewish people? I think you'll agree that it's right here with Tefillin. Really? Let me explain. The Israel Select Charity Fund, led by Rabbi Josh Friedman, has profoundly impacted countless lives. To date, they have provided over 7,000 pairs of tefillin to soldiers, many of whom have never had the opportunity to wear tefillin ever before. Each soldier has made a personal commitment to wear their tefillin every day, fostering a deep and lasting connection to Hashem. And I know what you're thinking. Don't worry, they're not going to wear the tefillin on Shabbos. So with this project, we are on the brink of achieving our next milestone, but need your support to cross the finish line. We require the last $400,000 to ensure that every soldier who wishes to participate can receive their own set of tefillin. At just $500 per set, your donation will directly provide these brave individuals with the spiritual tools they need to strengthen their Jewish identity and practice. Plus, a generous donor is matching. Yes, that means if you donate 1 pair to a soldier, another soldier will get a pair. Donate 2, you get 4. Donate 100, get 200. You know how math works. Your contribution will not only honor the dedication of our soldiers, but also uphold a sacred tradition that links them to generations past and future. Please join us in this noble project. Donate now at bit.ly/tefillinspire. It's like one word. You'll see the link in the show notes, so you'll actually be able to click on it. Of course, you go to Israel Select. Help us reach our goal. Every dollar counts, and every set of tefillin makes a world of difference. Thank you for your generosity and support. Together, we are winning both the physical and spiritual war. Now back to my conversation with Rabbi B. Okay, I want to go back to your background. That you go to Harvard, you become a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could be wrong. I don't think you're practicing law right now. When did that transition out of law?
Well, what happened was this. I graduated law school, so I actually worked in a law firm in Chicago, Mayer, Brown and Platt, for around 2.5 years. Now, how did I get to Chicago, right? I had no shaykhs to Chicago. So it's interesting. I had a very, very good friend who now lives in Eretz Israel, and he wanted me to visit him in Chicago. So I said, well, I don't have the money. I can't take a trip to Chicago. So he said, well, listen, why don't you sign up with the interview? Because when I went to Harvard, all the law firms come to Harvard to interview, and if they like you, they invite you for a trip. So he says, sign up, get an interview, they'll pay for a trip, and then you'll get to visit me. So I said, that's Geneva. I'm not gonna live in Chicago. So what, I should get them to give me a trip when I for sure will never live in Chicago? So he says, you never know what's gonna be. So I did it. I got my interview, and I wound up working in Chicago. I met my wife in Chicago. My Rebbetzin is from Chicago, and I loved Chicago. I lived in Chicago for 4 years. But after around 2.5 years in legal practice, I started teaching law at the University of Illinois, which was a commute. The University of Illinois is not in Chicago. It was Champaign-Urbana. So I would actually commute twice a week. There was an old commuter airline, Brit Airways, which, it's like these little tiny commuter jets in a Chicago winter. Kind of scary. You have to bench Gomel every time. And then I got a job at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. So we moved to Baltimore, and then I combined my law teaching with Rabbanus in Silver Spring. So I guess the first thing was that I was a full-time lawyer for around 2.5 years. Then I was a full-time professor for around 2 years. No more than for around 10 years. But then I combined my professorship with a Rabbanus in Silver Spring. So that was beginning the transition more to the Olam HaTorah. Now, even when I was full-time, lawyering, I was giving shiurim and I was learning. But the movement began when I combined my law teaching with my Rabbanus, and that was for around 22 years. And then eventually I got more and more and more involved in what you might call the Torah world. Again, kind of reattaching myself to the Torah world till eventually I'm in Ohr Somayach. So this is, I teach in other places besides Ohr Somayach, but everything is, Baruch Hashem, everything now is, I think, Torah related.
Was it difficult for you to pick up from America and move to AIRSUIT and put Ohr Somayach?
Yeah, it is difficult. I have to say my wife was the dominant koach. I was doing a lot of things in Chutz La'aretz. So even though I spoke as a Rav, I spoke about Eretz Yisrael, I spoke about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. I said everybody has to, think about, living here. But I myself, I was using what you might call the rabbinic catcher. They need me, I can't leave, how can I leave? So I have to stay, But my Rebbitzin was very pushy about it. She said, we gotta go. And really, I'm only here only because of her influence, which Baruch Hashem. So we're very, very happy that we're here. But there are costs. When it says Eretz Yisrael niknas b'yisur, and Eretz Yisrael is acquired with pain, there are a lot of things. There are the inconveniences, there are the different culture, whatever. But it's also the separation from family. When we came to Eretz Yisrael, my mom, Allah Shalom, was still alive. So, we left her. She was in her 90s. In those days, I used to actually go back to America almost every 6 weeks. Usually Ohr Somayach had reason, so they paid for the trip because I had stuff I did.
You were doing job interviews for law firms.
Right. No, but I was giving shiur. So I got to see my mom fairly often, but my mother is no longer alive. My father was nifter before we went to Eretz Yisrael. But we only have one child. One child lives in Baltimore. So, we don't see them that often. And, actually, I haven't been in America since before COVID.
Wow.
So it's been a long time. So those things are very hard. My grandchildren, those things are very, very, very hard. Like everything else, you have to make a cheshbon. Life has, everything in life has a cost and has a benefit, and you have to weigh it. So it's a difficult shekel.
Can I ask you about, and this may be uncomfortable, so we could take it out if you don't feel comfortable with it, but I want to ask you about your child, who, for I understand, is adopted. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, we were married for a while. We were not yet blessed with children. So we adopted. Actually, the adoption came out of the blue. We were not bedavka looking to adopt, but a relative of ours just came across an opportunity. And we adopted our son at the age of 1 week old.
Wow.
And so we've had him really virtually his whole life. And what can I tell you? He's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person in every possible way. It brings tears to my eyes when I think about what a great, great kid he is. Now he's a man.
Yeah, I see.
He's a father. Yeah.
Wow. That's beautiful. I can see how much nachas you're getting. Well, what advice or chizuk could you give to someone who is struggling with having children and they're thinking like, oh, maybe we should adopt?
Well, it's a very hard thing. Infertility is a difficult challenge for everybody, Jew or non-Jew. For a religious Jew, maybe it's even more of a challenge because there's such a mitzvah of pru to have children, and then you even have the pressure that everybody around you, Baruch Hashem, is having big families, and therefore I think there's an extra layer of pressure, and that's one thing. Now, Baruch Hashem, there have been amazing advances in fertility technology, both in terms of female issues and male issues. And we have organizations like Bonei Olam, sure, which does fantastic, amazing work, which were not really around when we were going through this challenge. But at the end of the day, it's still very true that the fertility regimen is very emotionally draining. You're dealing with hormones, you're dealing with timing, you get your hopes up, and then for whatever reason, the Ribbon Shalom has not decided. And it can really wreak havoc on a marriage unless the husband and wife are very, very strong and connected to each other. This can be a source of tremendous heartbreak. And can even break up. A marriage could even break up over this particular issue. So, like everything else, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You got to work with two contradictory mindsets at the same time. On one hand, you want to make your hishtadlus, you want to make your effort, you want to pursue whatever avenues are there, but at the same time, you have to know that your marriage is a beautiful, holy thing, even without children. There's a beautiful thought from the Sefer Akedas Yitzchak, that when Rachel says to Yaakov, we're going to read, if I don't have children, lama li chaim, why should I be alive? So Yaakov is very cruel. Yaakov says to her, Hatachas Elokim anochi, am I in the place of God, asher mana mimech, that God has withheld from you children? And Rashi says, there's a certain knife here. I got kids. It's your problem. The Medrash, in fact, criticizes Yaakov. The Medrash says, is this how you talk to somebody in pain? But the Akedas Yitzchak says a beautiful word that I think infertile couples need to remember. When Rachel says, without children, I might as well die, she's basically saying that the only value of her life is to have children. That is upsetting Yaakov. Yaakov is saying, how can you define your life that way? There is something intrinsically holy about a marriage, about a union, about the kesher of husband and wife. So it's important for people to understand that, yes, it's a mitzvah to have children. Yes, children are a tremendous, tremendous blessing. And we do what we can. But we also have to know that marriage is a blessing. That you can build, ish ve'isha, husband and wife living together, shechina shureya beinayim. It doesn't say only if they have children. The shechina is with a couple that is living b'shalom. So, simultaneously with the desire to have children, you also have to know your life is not worthless without children. Your life is valuable. And you can't live your life, again, crying over what you don't have. Other than tefillah. You got to see what you do have. So seen in this way, adoption is a good option. Now again, halachically, adoption is not a kiyum of pru or vu. There is one exception, or Shlomo Kluger actually paskins, yes, but most poskim it's not pru or vu. But it gives you an opportunity to show love, to build a neshama, to, basically give a person a life. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So it's something to think about. Now, again, there are interesting shilas. Adoption has halachic shilas. So if someone is planning to adopt, you need to talk to a posek about it. If it's a Jewish kid, the shaila might be mamzer, shtuki, a foundling. You don't know who the parents are. If it's a non-Jewish kid, then you have to go through the laws of converting children. And then bein kach ubein kach, under either situation, the questions become, normally a mother is allowed to hug or kiss a son, no matter what age, and a father to a daughter. But by adoption, there are poskim that are very machmir, above a certain age, let's say, whatever the age would be. So you got to check into it. There are halachic issues, but I think adoption can satisfy the emotional need to raise a child, and you're giving a child a home who otherwise wouldn't have it. And just in terms of nachas, I can tell you that our nachas is I can't believe it would be any more if it would be a physical child.
That's really beautiful. There's so many topics and questions that you get dealt with, and I just want to try to bring up a few. I am not necessarily controversial on the show, but I think you do a very good job at dealing with topics that might be deemed as controversial, and you have just such a good way of explaining it. So before we even get into it, is there a science to breaking down a machlekes or a controversy and explaining it in a way that is pleasant, I guess?
Well, I tell you, once again, to the degree that I can do it, and I don't know if I always do it, and I don't want to say that I'm successful, but to whatever degree I can achieve it, I connect a lot to going back to Hartford, Connecticut. I don't know, just that notion of the role models I had growing up were people who conveyed the Torah's teachings in a very kind and gentle and understanding way. It is what it is. And I think, it's helped me a lot. The other thing is, going back to Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky's Eitzah, that whatever I do, I got to use it for Hashem. I think law teaching has helped me. I was a law professor for many years, and you break things down. You're able to explain things. Even speaking English well is a It's a useful tool, because not everybody understands the yeshivish lingo. Now already, since I've been in yeshiva now, so I'm back to the yeshivish lingo a little bit more. But for many years, I had to keep away from it, because of it. But I think too, it's important, and you see this among the great Rosh Yeshivas, Rabbi Zalman, etc., that somebody asks a question, and the question may not actually be such a good question, but what you do is you build up the question, you show a respect for the questioner. And you say, "Oh, you're trying to come up with this idea," and you kind of you try to see the nekudat ha'emet, the point of truth within what the person is saying, and then the person becomes more receptive to what you're trying to teach, because he feels legitimated, he feels accepted, and then he's open to you. So I think a lot of times, this is a big diffuser of arguments. Sometimes people come in and say, how come the Haredim don't go to the army, and whatever. They're there to raise a whole bunch of attacks. I find, now some will disagree with me, I find that sometimes a very effective way of addressing the issue is to have partial admission, moda b'miktsas, to say, you have a point, but let's consider some other points. Instead of saying, you're totally wrong, because when I say you're totally wrong, so you're going to shut down, and you're going to resent it, and then you'll say, oh, you're totally wrong. But if I can say to you, there's something to what you're saying, and I hear it, but maybe there's something else. I consider that extremely important in these types of controversial discussions.
And I'm asking on the spot, but could you give us an example of something that people ask you a bunch in the past few years that's maybe controversial? And
well, people will ask me things like, why don't Haredim serve in the army? Why don't they say the prayer for the state of Israel, or the prayer for Chayolim? And by the way, I can't say I have an answer for every one of those questions, but the point is, often the issue, my goal is not to answer.
Do you want to break it down a little? We don't have to go into it. But.
Yeah, so I'll basically say, number one, I'll say, like I just said, you have a point. I understand that there are people who are sacrificing their lives. And I would emphasize, and we in the Haredi world or the Torah world, we have to be appreciative. We have to be grateful. That alone already softens them a lot, because they see that instead of saying, oh, the soldiers are nothing and it's only our Torah that gives nitzachon, I say, no, you're doing a lot, and we appreciate a lot, and we understand your sacrifices. And if we sometimes don't show hakara satov, that's our problem. So that's kind of my hakdama. And then we'll talk about the fact that a believer in God understands that although we need an army and we need the physical elements to deal with crises, but ultimately without God we're doomed, and therefore the Torah and the mitzvahs are what is bringing down. But you see, the point is, by acknowledging the importance of what they are doing, whoever they are, they'll be able to openly see what we're doing. Is
there always, though, a side to admit that? Because in this example, I totally understand I understand where they're coming from. But I'm sure there's sometimes times where someone comes and you're like, there's no credibility to what they're saying.
Well, you're right. A very good example might be gay marriage. Again, being controversial, but as somebody says, how can the Torah not allow, two men who love each other to be married? What type of cruel, again, chas v'shalom, what type of cruel religion denies the reality of love? Now here, I can't kind of acknowledge that there's any correctness in what they're saying, because halacha is halacha. There's no room to play. Certainly within a Torah framework, that's impossible. But what I can do is, I can say, I acknowledge your pain. Meaning sometimes with a Rav gets a shaila, and there's no way out. But just because there's no way out doesn't mean I can't cry for you. I can cry for you even if there's no way out. And that, I think, helps people too.
Wow.
They at least understand that I understand the nisayon that a person faces. So maybe that's a second best response.
Wouldn't they turn to you and say, listen, I know maybe you can understand it, but thankfully you're not living it, and then to tell someone who's...
You're right. So again, I'll be minded to all those things. Listen, I don't know what you're... I don't know what you're going through. You're right. But I know it's hard. And I just want you to know that I feel for you. I think about you. And again, am I going to say, is this going to work? Whatever work even means, lav davka. Okay. I mean, listen, I or anybody, I can't solve every single problem in the world, but at least a person doesn't feel rejected. A person doesn't feel tzibrochen. And I'll make a point too that whatever you do in one area doesn't mean you can't do things in another area. A guy in a gay marriage can still put on tefillin every day. Can still keep Shabbos. Can still learn Daf Yomi. So just because you're nichshol in one thing doesn't mean everything else is bottled. So that's another nekuda. Mm-hmm. Let's work on what we can share a common ground. Mm-hmm. And there may be areas that we disagree or we can't reconcile, but that doesn't mean you throw out everything. So that also is at least a mahalech that you can kind of suggest to people.
We're going to take a soft break, but first we're going to talk about BitBean. If you're a business owner, you've heard me mention BitBean before. And there's good reason I keep talking about them. They are the most popular software development company in the Jewish world because they understand businesses' pain points and create custom solutions that drive results. And of course, the rest of the world is loving them too. Now, let me share a new reason why you should consider BitBean if you're a business owner. Recently, they worked with a real estate company struggling with property management and communication inefficiencies. BitBean developed a tailored software solution that streamlined these processes, resulting in a remarkable 30% increase in revenue. This isn't just a quick fix. BitBean's custom software transforms businesses, addressing specific challenges and propelling growth. They dive deep to understand your needs and craft solutions that make a real impact. If you're looking for a partner to revolutionize your business, BitBean is the answer. Reach out to them and discover how they can help take your business to the next level. Visit them at bitbean.com. And we'll be right back to this week's episode. But lastly, let's talk about Twillory. You all know how much I love Twillory. It's my go-to brand for clothing. They've truly mastered the balance between comfort and style. And right now I'm wearing one of their button-down short sleeve shirts, and it's honestly the most comfortable shirt I own. Their polo shirts, unmatched in comfort. And let me tell you, I've had a pair of their pants for 6 years. They still look brand new. And I may have had to go one size up since I gained a little weight over the past few years. And Twillory also makes incredible suits that are not just stylish, but incredibly light and comfortable. And yes, Twillory isn't the cheapest option out there, but you get what you pay for. Quality that lasts, looks that impress, and comfort that keeps you coming back. And because I want you to experience this for yourself, I've got a special offer for you. Yes, $18 off your first purchase. Trust me, once you try Twillory, you'll understand why I'm such a fan. Go to Twillory.com, use the discount, and upgrade your wardrobe with the best men's clothing out there. Now, back to this week's episode.
What kind of shilas do you get? I mean, obviously every old Torah is the best thing ever, but what shilas speak to you personally? Is it I know you give a lot of shame on cloning, is there do you is it just okay, let's delve into it, or do you particularly really
it's changed with time. There was a time that I was giving 20 lectures a month on cloning, a whole bunch of this stuff. After a while, okay, I'm not
dealt with cloning.
I'm not into cloning anymore. That's actually my problem. My problem is I sometimes get bored talking about the same topic, and yet if a topic was popular, people want
more of it.
They want to keep on hearing about it, and the like now. I mean, obviously we're in a Milchama and it's this very serious stuff, but Gog and Magog is an extreme topic of fascination.
Could we talk into it? And
we
for
can
people,
talk about it,
for people who don't know what Gog and Magog is,
I'll talk about that.
Sorry for making you talk about this again.
That's the thing. So my wife says, my brother's the same way. He says the Breitowitz boys just don't like to repeat. It's the same thing. I mean, it hurts my wife too. If I give a drasha Friday night, and I come home and my wife wants to hear the drasha, it's hard for me to say it over. I said it already.
Chazar is dicker.
You're right. You're right. It's not. It's a chisaron. I'm not proud of it, but it's hard for me to repeat things. But all right. So Gog and Magog. I mean, again, it's interesting. Everyone talks about Gog and Magog. Nobody really knows b'diuk what it's referring to. The truth is, in the book of Yecheskel, Perek Lamed Tes, it's the Haftorah for the first day of Sukkot, it is described that there will be a king who is called Gog from the land of Magog. So it's not Gog versus Magog. Gog, Me'eretz Magog, and it's described as coming from the north, will lead a confederation of nations against Yerushalayim. And what will happen is that those nations will be defeated in miraculous ways. and that will bring the eventual geula. Now, that's a very schematic, brief description. What it means, who is Gog, what is Magog, what are the lands of the north? Is it Russia, Ukraine? Is it Arab, Israeli? Is it the German Holocaust? People talk about it, people debate. But the one thing we know is, the one thing we know is, the one thing we know is there will be tremendous apocalyptic struggles before the coming of Mashiach, and in other parts of Chazal, this is described as the birth pains of Mashiach. Chavle Mashiach, just as birth, which is a wonderful process that brings life into the world, comes out of pain, so Geula comes out of pain. And people are trying to attach different events to the Gog and Magog cycle. Now, it's important to remember the warning of the Rambam. The Rambam says it is not worthwhile to try to be too specific in interpreting everything in light of Gog and Magog, because we simply don't know. Meaning we'll know in retrospect. When Mashiach comes, I can then look backwards and say, this was this and this was this. Before Mashiach comes, you never really know. But there are indicators. A lot of the Gog and Magog descriptions in Chazal do correspond to a lot of our events. Now, then there's another theme, which is not Gog and Magog. People mix it up. There are two things that describe the pre-Messianic apocalypse. One is Gog and Magog, and the other is the ascendancy of Yishmael and Persia, Iran. And those are two different developments, but both of them kind of are described as happening. And I think we've seen that. Some connect Gog and Magog to Russia and the Ukraine. So the teaching goes back to the Vilna Gaon. Yishmael and Paras is, the Arabs and Iran. Iran is Paras. Iran are not Arabs. They're Islamic non-Arabs. So it's very tantalizing. Again, we're not supposed to necessarily delve into it, but many of us cannot help but think that there are connections, especially since Gog and Magog is connected to Sukkot. And of course, the October 7th massacre was on Shmini Atzeres, the last day kind of the Sukkot holiday. So I think Rav Moshe Sternbach did point out that he felt that this was the manifestations of Gog and Magog. Now, there are two interesting teachings of the Vilna Gaon on Gog and Magog that are worthwhile. One is scary and one is comforting. The scary one is that Gog and Magog is only supposed to take 12 minutes. And for 250 years, no one understood what type of war would be over in 12 minutes. Now, unfortunately, we know exactly what type of war could be over in 12 minutes. That would be a nuclear war. And to make things even worse, if you look in Zechariah, which also has, Yecheskel is the main description, but there are descriptions in Zechariah, it talks about people's flesh melting on their bones.
Wow.
Which is really a description of nuclear holocaust. So that's the scary bad news. And indeed, with Iran, this is at least in the realm of possibility. However, the good news is that the Gra says that all of these wars and all of this destruction is not inevitable. They can be bypassed with tshuva, with sechusim, merits, avas Yisrael. So therefore, it's not a done deal. There's a general rule in Judaism that negative prophecies can always be changed. No negative prophecy is final. And that's why the Rambam writes that a Navi cannot be discredited. If he says a bad thing is going to happen and it doesn't happen, maybe Hashem has mercy. A Navi can only be discredited if he says a good thing is going to happen and it doesn't happen. Then we know he's a false Navi. So the good news is it's still within our hands to kind of mitigate or minimize. We're already in perhaps the Gog and Magog, but we could, shorten the process. We could make it easier and the like.
If someone would ask you that, if the other generations couldn't bring Mashiach, then how could our generation bring Mashiach?
Yeah, so that's a great question. On one hand, we say, Niskatnu Hadoros, the generations get smaller and smaller and smaller. So what? So we're going to bring Mashiach, and what's going on? If the Vilna Gaon couldn't do it, what are we supposed to do? So there are really two answers. One answer is, it's not the idea that we bring Mashiach. And imagine that to get to Mashiach, you got to climb a wall. And the wall is like 10,000 feet high. The previous generations have already gone 9,999. So it's not that I bring Mashiach. I'm the final inch that gets you over the top, standing on the cumulative zechuyot of Am Yisrael. So it may very well be that the previous generations did a lot more than we did, but we got to finish the process. I think that's a relatively simple answer. Another answer would be, the Chavetz Chaim said this, that precisely because we're a weaker generation, our mitzvos may count more, meaning to say we don't understand as much. We have more yetzer haras. We have social media. We have all of these distractions. And those who still try to do mitzvot, Hashem will count it as more. So something that, I'll make up a number, there's no particular, something that may have counted as a 10 100 years ago may count as a 50 now. So even though we're less, it's precisely the fact that we're inferior that makes whatever we do maybe count even more.
You just mentioned technology, and I know the Rav is a lot more adept in technology than maybe a lot of Rabbanim. What do you have to say about it? You could say maybe the negative side of technology, or maybe the other side, the positive, what technology could do for Torah.
Yeah. So I'm very far from an expert, but I think the 8-year-old knows more than me. But I do use technology to some degree. It is interesting that in Eretz Yisrael here, you see all sorts of announcements against everything. But Rabbi Yashav, Zichrono Livracha, when he was alive, refused to sign an outright ban on the internet. Because he said the internet it can also be a source of Torah. So how can I prohibit it? So this is where we have a problem. On one hand, technology has many, many negative potentials. There is no question about it. I don't just mean the obvious things like pornography, which, chas v'shalom, the things you can bring into your house today are unimaginable. It used to be you had to look for the tumah. Now the tumah is right there. And that's awful. And that's why, some type of filter is pretty mandatory. But it's not just that. It's the wasting of time. It's the even in learning, the inability to concentrate. You're web surfing. You're hopping from link to link to link to link to link to link instead of thinking deeply about what you're doing. So there's a lot of things. There's with smartphones and they have these almost comedies where husband and wife are sitting at a table and everyone is looking at their phone. No one's even talking to each other, or whatever it is. So it can also destroy shalom bayis. It can destroy relationships of parents and children, which is why it's interesting. A few years ago, there's a phenomenon in the modern Orthodox teenage community called half Shabbos, where the kids keep Shabbos except for texting. They got to text. They're so addicted to texting. So some guy was trying to figure out a halachically permissible way to create a texting mechanism on Shabbos. It didn't work, but he was making cheshbonos. But I was thinking to myself, let's imagine you could invent a permissible way to text. Why would you want to do that? I mean, Baruch Hashem, Shabbos is the one gift that's menatek. It cuts us off from all of this technology. And that's a tremendous bracha. So you want to bring it back in even on Shabbos? Okay. So there's a lot of negatives. There is a lot of negatives. There's no question. But there's also a lot of positives. I mean, I do a tremendous amount of research on the internet. A website like HebrewBooks.org, which is just a website, you get more than 50,000, and Otzar HaChachma even more so. Otzar HaChachma is more than 100,000, but that costs money. But HebrewBooks.org is for free. I can get 50,000 svarim, I use it constantly, and just articles and divrei Torah. So I think it's a difficult cheshbon. I know we have asifas, we have get-togethers, we ban this, we aser this. But the question is it better to aser, or is it better to be mechanech people how to use it in a good and proper way?
It's interesting because I remember when the internet kind of, I guess, came out or becoming more popular, at least in the yeshiva world, it was very aser. And what I personally saw is one of the reasons why I wanted to start podcasting, again, I'm not saying I'm a gadol or anything, but I think I'm not a bad person. And again, I who gives me the right for a platform? Good question. But there's everyone's just pick up their phone and pick up Instagram, pick up whatever it is, and now all of a sudden they have a loud voice, and all the B'nai Torah were ossered from it. So there wasn't a real voice, and we're getting like drowned out.
I think that's an excellent point, meaning this is a technology. It will be used. Millions and millions and millions of people, Jews, are going to go on it. So don't you need a Torah presence? Don't you need a presence that kind of counteracts all the bad stuff with words of Torah, chizuk, philosophy, valid philosophy, whatever it would be as an educational tool. So when you remove yourself from such a powerful technology, and I understand the reasons for it, I do understand the reasons for it, but you also have to keep in mind there's a significant cost. And like everything else, you can't just say, it's a davar pashut, I'm going to remove myself. You have to cheshbon into your decision, what is it that I'm giving up and what is it that I'm not contributing to Klal Yisrael by not doing these things.
I heard that there's maybe multiple, but there's for sure at least one story when you were a child with Reb Moshe Feinstein.
Yeah. I'm a little embarrassed because I say this story over so often that people might be listening.
Please say it as if no one ever heard it.
We've heard it 100 times.
So say it to me. I never heard it. I just heard there's a story.
But I love this story, and I think about it a lot. It gives me a lot of chizuk in my own life. Reb Moshe Feinstein had a relative in Hartford, a shochet, Rav Berman, Zechrona Livracha, whose daughter was a classmate of mine, Esther. In fact, that's Julius Berman is a big macher, and he's the son of Rabbi Berman. So Rav Moshe used to go to Hartford for a few years. Every summer, he would spend 2 weeks in Hartford. Our joke at the time was he wanted to go to the one place in the world that nobody would ask him any shilas. that was our joke. So I was in 4th grade. And this was, I don't know, when it was, 1963, 2. And I was zoche to be in the car that would pick him up for Shachris every morning, because I used to daven Shachris in Shol, Young Israel, and then walk over to school that was 2 blocks away. So I sat in the car, and I know Russia never spoke to me. I never spoke to him. But the one thing I do remember, I remember 100% that his face had a glow. There was like the light of the Shekhinah. That I remember. I wasn't that conversant with Yiddish. His Yiddish, Bichlal, was very hard to follow anyway. So he spoke. I didn't know what he was saying. But his face, unmistakable glow. And I remember we would pick him up at 6:30 for Shachris, and he would be wearing like a blue terry cloth robe, sitting outside, learning Mishnayos with a cup of tea, and then he'd put it away and put on his kapata, get into the car. We'd take him to shul. So what happened sometimes was that I would still be davening. They gave me the key. I was a little precocious 9-year-old. I had the key to the shul. And I would be davening. I'd be the last person, and I would lock up and then go. Or they actually locked up the shul, but I was able to get myself out. So one time it was raining, and I was still davening for another 10 or 15 minutes, and all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. Someone's banging at the door. So I open up the door, and the guy who was the driver came back, and he said, Rabbi Feinstein, when we dropped Rabbi Feinstein off, he said he remembered there was a little kid in the back. And he asked me if I could come back and drive you to school because he didn't want you to walk in the rain. Now, it's an amazing thing. Number one, it was only 2 blocks away. And number 2, I didn't mind walking in the rain. And the truth is, even today, I don't mind walking in the rain. And number 3, all the guys who knew me, the adults knew who I was, and nobody had a havamina, nobody had a supposition. They have to give me a ride to school if I wasn't ready when they were ready to go. So who was the one who really thought about a little child? The Gadol Hador, the greatest rabbi who every shaila of Klal Yisrael was on his mind. And yet he didn't want me to walk 2 blocks on the road. It's just the most amazing thing, that it just shows you that the greater the person, the more he cares about everybody. And once again, to me, that's what measures the godless of a person. You can't, Rav Moshe's knowledge of Kol HaTorah Kula was phenomenal. I mean, you can't just say, he was a nice guy. Rav Moshe was a sholeit, b'chol HaTorah Kula. And afal pichein, look at the Avas Yisrael, look at the love that he had, the care. And I'm not even going to say afal pichein. It's not that even though he was so learned, he had this love. It's what the Torah made him. This is what he got from the Torah. The Torah made him this way. Now, I have to add this advertisement. I always give this advertisement.
Sure.
Because the biography of Rabbi David Feinstein, I was not so to know Rabbi David Feinstein, so I have no personal story with him. But I have to say that if you read the biography, you truly see that he was a son of Rav Moshe. You see story after story that way. And I think that's a very important thing, because sometimes the Gedolim biographies emphasize how brilliant the Gadol is. He knew Kol HaTorah Kula at 4 years old, or whatever it is. And they sometimes, I think this is perverse on the part of the authors, they almost say, oh, he was so orangutan, he was so involved in learning, he didn't know his children's birthdays. He didn't recognize his grandson in the street. And this is sometimes presented like a mila, like something good. The truth of the matter is, we need to hear the other side of this. We need to hear that your godless in Torah exists side by side with the love that you have for your family and for other people, for Yidden, for Goyim even, for everybody. And that's why I often send people to the Rav Moshe biography and the Rav David biography, Rav David Feinstein, because both of them make those points in beautiful, beautiful ways.
It's very nice. Okay, beautiful. I know I could spend another 17 hours with you and not even scratch the surface, but I want you to choose how we end this off. You could choose maybe words of chizik for everyone, maybe a vart in the parsha, or this probably won't air this week, so it doesn't have to be this parsha. It could be from the Torah, or something from the Gemara. I don't know. Whatever it is, the floor is yours to talk to everyone.
Well, again, I don't have necessarily a grand pronouncement. As everybody knows, it's obvious. We are all going through difficult times in Eretz Yisrael, difficult times in the world. People often ask me, oh, is it safe to live in Israel? Well, is it safe to live in New York? I hear about the students in Cooper Union or Columbia University. They're hiding, it's reminiscent of hiding from the Germans in the Holocaust. They're hiding in the back room of a library. Like, what on earth is going on? So the world is dangerous. And because the world is dangerous, the world is scary. In that sense, living in much of Eretz Yisrael may not be much different than living anywhere else. But, so all of us are confused, all of us are frightened, all of us are scared. And even before this surah, people are looking for a meaning in their life, a purpose in their life. And even a person who's religious, he keeps the mitzvahs. Sometimes people don't feel connected to Hashem, or connected to each other, or connected to themselves. So a person has to realize that life is sometimes hard and there's going to be challenges. Emunah doesn't mean life is going to be easy. And the other way around, the Brisker Rav said, you don't really need him, or it's easy to have emunah when life is easy. But the real test is when there are challenges. And Rav Tzadok writes, just as you have to have emunah in Hashem, you have to have emunah in yourself, that you're worthy, that you have something to contribute, that Hashem loves you, that Hashem cares about you. And recognize that in our failures and in our mistakes, there are the seeds of tremendous growth and tremendous potential. And therefore, we shouldn't be broken and we shouldn't be discouraged. You're trying to live a good life. Chabad has a wonderful saying. I'm not sure, I heard it in a song. I'm not sure if the actual words are taken from somewhere. But they said, in life, the battle is the victory. That's tremendous, meaning you're in the arena. You're fighting and you're striving to do good. Sometimes you'll win, sometimes you lose. But even when you lose, it's a victory because you're trying. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is machshav of that. So we have to remember our lives have meaning, our lives have purpose. And we have to see it in us and we have to see it in others. You don't even remember this anymore, but before October 7th, the state of Israel was falling apart. There were demonstrations constantly, day after day after day, from the secular side of it because of judicial reform, from the religious side of it because of the army, whatever the issue was. And everybody was saying, Israeli society is falling apart. Democracy in Israel is doomed. Soldiers or reservists were saying they're not going to report to reserve duty. Did that embolden Hamas to think it was a good time to attack? Maybe so. I can't say for sure. Baruch Hashem, when push came to shove, everybody reported, but if the enemy hears, you're not going to report. So there was such a sinas chinam, such a lack of achdus. On Yom Kippur, a mechitza gets pulled down in Tel Aviv because chas v'shalom, you have a kosher minyan in Tel Aviv. If there's any silver lining to the darkness we're going through, and may Hashem bring us a Hatzalah very, very soon, it's a lot of the divisions are healing, I think. Just like Hamas didn't care if you had a black kippah, a knitted kippah, or no kippah. We're realizing, at least on a certain level of Ahavas Yisrael, we got to care for everybody. I think Thomas Paine said in the American Revolution, we have to hang together, otherwise we're going to hang separately. And that's very, very true. So you have tens of thousands of chayalim, non-religious, who want to wear tzitzis, and some want to wear tefillin every day. And you have charedim who are, bringing food and medicine and supplies and tzitzis and tefillin. And some have even joined the army. A few, I think 2,000 have joined the army. So I see this as a wonderful thing. It's a chaval that it only comes after these tragedies. But great, great things are happening. My big fear is that when this challenge passes, and it should pass soon, I hope, we'll just go back to business as usual, and that would be tragic. I hope we can build on this achdus, and that will bring Mashiach. The famous word of Reb Kook, that the Churban came because of sinas chinam, the irrational hatred. It will come when we have an ava without, a love without boundary. And I'm beginning to see it happen. And that gives me hope.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Breitowitz.
Now, if you got up to the deep end of the interview, please drop the word genius in the comments. Also, we may do a part 2 one day. So what's a difficult topic in Judaism you'd want us to discuss with Rabbi Breitowitz? Please let us know in the YouTube comments below. And by the way, we'll link Rabbi Breitowitz's podcast in the show notes. It's really epic, and you should go check it out. And again, thank you to Reb Zevi Kaufman and Ohr Somayach for facilitating this interview. Definitely go check out Ohr Somayach if you're ever in Yerushalayim. Check out Rabbi Breitowitz. It's such a vibrant and beautiful yeshiva. And before I get to my personal favorite part of this episode, I'd like to once again thank our sponsors and encourage you to check them out. Get the lightest and coziest suits from Twillory.com. The code word is INSPIRE. Call our friends at BitBean to take your business to the next level. Donate a pair of Tefillin to a soldier in need. It's literally life-changing. And there's a link in the show notes. And go to Torah Anytime to learn the best Torah and check out their beautiful array of platforms. Chesed Anytime, Story Anytime, Daily Dose, their app. It's all there. Now, here are my thoughts. Rabbi Breitowitz is someone who doesn't really feel like he's from this generation. He's so advanced when it comes to almost any topic. I find it beautiful how smart he is, but he's also so deeply human. You can hear in his voice how caring he is. He's a fusion of the head and the heart. And I think that's truly the key to a good life, living with balance. I was able to ask him really about anything, and his brilliant responses to very complicated questions was great. But when I think back to our conversation, I think about how moved I was to see him tear up talking about his son. Really beautiful. If you enjoyed this conversation, please go ahead and check out my brother Ellie's conversation with Rabbi Breitowitz on kosher money. We'll link it below. It's really fascinating. Now for our big announcement. Drum roll. We are providing you with a beautiful, powerful, free Tisha B'Av movie. It'll be available on YouTube, and everyone who's been working on it can't stop crying. And if you want to feel something on this Tisha B'Av, then get ready for this. And last but not least, remember, inspiration is everywhere. Thank you for watching.
Living L'chaim.